Human remains have been found close to the wreck of the cruise liner the Costa Concordia, which ran aground and capsized near an Italian island early last year. Italy's Civil Protection Agency says DNA tests will determine the identities of the remains once divers have recovered them.
On January 13, 2012, the Costa Concordia, a luxury cruise ship, sank off the coast of Italy, taking 32 lives with it. What was meant to be a dream vacation turned into a deadly nightmare as passengers scrambled for safety while the ship tilted and flooded. The captain abandoned ship, leaving passengers behind, while a massive rescue operation unfolded. The world watched in horror as a modern marvel of engineering became a twisted wreck. What happened that night is a chilling reminder of how quickly disaster can strike, and the shocking truths that followed still haunt us today.
The situation went from bad to worse to chaos.
The events unfolded rapidly, beginning with a simple navigational error. The ship, captained by Francesco Schettino, had deviated from its planned course, a decision that led the vessel dangerously close to the rocky shoreline of the island. At approximately 9:45 p.m., the Costa Concordia struck the reef, causing significant damage to its hull. The impact ruptured several of the ship's compartments, flooding the lower decks. Within moments, the ship began to list to one side, making it difficult for passengers and crew to maintain their balance, and causing panic among those aboard.
Hit the kids, go!
As the ship started to capsize, there was desperation on deck. Lifeboats either full or gone, as thousands fled for their lives and 32 died.
As the ship began to tilt, it became clear that the situation was far more serious than anyone had anticipated. The initial shock quickly gave way to confusion and chaos. Passengers scrambled to put on life jackets, while some took to the lifeboats, attempting to escape the sinking vessel. Many, however, were trapped inside the ship, as some of the lifeboats were rendered useless or unable to be launched due to the ship's unstable position.
Now, the final chapter in the tale of the man blamed for it all, the captain who wouldn't go down with his ship. He says even when faced with criminal charges of manslaughter in those 32 deaths, Schettino always tried to appear the man in charge.
And there is a difference between crime and accident. In this case, it's been treated like a crime. I don't understand why.
The Italian Coast Guard was alerted almost immediately, and rescue operations began. However, the sheer scale of the disaster made it difficult to coordinate an efficient response. The ship was positioned perilously close to the shoreline, which made it a logistical nightmare to evacuate everyone on board. It also posed a significant environmental risk, as the Costa Concordia had a large amount of fuel in its tanks, creating the potential for a devastating oil spill. Despite these immediate dangers, a heroic rescue effort was launched. The local community on Isola del Giglio, with its population of just a few thousand, came together to assist in the evacuation of the passengers. Fishermen and other locals, equipped with small boats, played a crucial role in ferrying survivors from the ship to safety. The Italian Coast Guard coordinated airlift operations, using helicopters to evacuate those stranded on the upper decks of the Costa Concordia. Though the response from local authorities was commendable, the confusion and uncertainty that accompanied the initial hours of the disaster led to a sense of desperation. Passengers and crew members were left wondering whether the authorities would be able to save them in time, as the ship slowly listed further into the water. For some, the ordeal would last for hours, with many having to wait in freezing conditions before they were rescued. Throughout the night, the Costa Concordia continued to capsize further, eventually coming to rest on its side in shallow water. The emergency response teams had to contend with the difficulty of reaching the stranded passengers, particularly those located in the lower decks and cabins. Due to the size and weight of the vessel, as well as the risk of further structural collapse, rescue teams were forced to work slowly and carefully to ensure no further lives were lost. By the following morning, the Costa Concordia was firmly grounded on the seabed, its massive hull partly submerged in the sea. Although the immediate loss of life had been limited, the disaster left 32 people dead, many of whom drowned or succumbed to injuries sustained in the chaos. The remaining passengers were eventually evacuated, but the process was far from easy. Some survivors were forced to wade through waist-high water, while others were hoisted by helicopters. The loss of life could have been much higher, but the quick actions of emergency responders and the bravery of the passengers who helped each other saved many lives. However, the wreckage of the Costa Concordia remained a stark reminder of how quickly things could go wrong when safety protocols were ignored. The disaster sparked widespread public outrage, not only because of the loss of life, but also because of the ship's captain Francesco Schettino, who abandoned the vessel while many of the passengers were still trapped inside. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Schettino's actions were widely condemned. He was later arrested and charged with manslaughter, abandoning ship, and causing the disaster. His decision to deviate from the planned course and sail dangerously close to the island was later seen as a critical factor that led to the accident. Following the Costa Concordia tragedy, there were calls for stricter safety regulations in the cruise industry, with particular emphasis on ensuring that captains and crew members followed proper protocols during emergencies. There was also widespread criticism of the ship's design, which some argued had failed to adequately accommodate the number of passengers on board. Others noted that the lack of proper safety drills and the inadequate response to the disaster indicated serious flaws in the maritime industry's readiness to handle such an event. In the months and years that followed, investigations were conducted to determine the precise causes of the disaster and whether any other parties were responsible. It became clear that a combination of human error, poor decision-making, and inadequate safety systems had contributed to the tragedy. Furthermore, the environmental risks posed by the wreckage of the Costa Concordia became a matter of international concern. As the disaster was investigated, experts and environmentalists focused on the potential environmental impact of the wreck. The Costa Concordia had over 2,000 tons of fuel in its tanks, raising fears of a catastrophic oil spill that could severely damage the local ecosystem. However, the Italian government and the cruise line took immediate steps to address these concerns by initiating operations to remove the fuel from the ship. The wreck itself was a danger to marine life in the area. It was located in the Tuscan Archipelago National Park, a pristine region known for its diverse marine life and protected status. While the wreck site itself did not cause widespread environmental damage, the long-term risks of pollution remained. The removal of the wreckage and the subsequent salvaging efforts would require significant resources, and many experts feared that the costs of restoring the ecosystem would be high. The disaster also led to an outpouring of support for the families of the victims. Many organizations and individuals rallied to help the survivors and the families of the deceased, providing financial aid and emotional support. In the face of overwhelming loss and grief, the survivors and the families of the victims became an important part of the collective memory of the Costa Concordia disaster. They would go on to become symbols of resilience and determination in the face of unimaginable circumstances. As investigations into the disaster continued, and the legal process unfolded, questions began to surface about the extent of the cruise line's responsibility. Did the company do enough to ensure the safety of its passengers? Was the ship properly maintained? And could more have been done to prevent such a tragedy from occurring? In the wake of the Costa Concordia disaster, cruise lines worldwide were forced to re-evaluate their safety procedures and improve the safety standards of their vessels. Stricter regulations were implemented to ensure that ships could be evacuated quickly and efficiently in case of an emergency. Additionally, new technologies were developed to enhance the ability to detect potential hazards before they became serious threats. But perhaps the most important lesson to be learned from the Costa Concordia disaster is the importance of human error prevention. While the ship was a technological marvel, it was ultimately human decisions that led to the loss of life. The tragedy serves as a reminder that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, it is the human element that remains the most critical factor in ensuring safety at sea. The Costa Concordia disaster is a tragedy that will be remembered for years to come. It is a stark reminder of the potential risks involved in the cruise industry and the consequences of neglecting safety standards. While the disaster may have been caused by a series of mistakes and poor decisions, it also serves as a testament to the bravery of those who risked their lives to save others. The wreck of the Costa Concordia may no longer be visible on the surface of the sea, but its impact will resonate for generations. The Costa Concordia salvage operation was one of the most complex and unprecedented feats in maritime history. Once the ship had finally come to rest on the seabed off the coast of Isola del Giglio, Italy, the focus shifted from rescue efforts to the monumental task of recovering the wreckage. The challenges presented by this operation were immense, not only due to the size and condition of the ship, but also because of the location, environmental risks, and the scale of the resources required. The first step in the process was to assess the condition of the Costa Concordia and determine what could be done to stabilize the ship. It was crucial to ensure that the wreck did not pose a further risk to the environment, particularly to the nearby Tuscan Archipelago National Park, which was home to a unique marine ecosystem. The Costa Concordia had over 2,000 tons of fuel on board when it capsized, creating the potential for a catastrophic oil spill. This was a primary concern for both the Italian authorities and the international community, as such an incident could have led to extensive damage to the surrounding environment. In the months following the disaster, efforts to remove the fuel from the wreck were prioritized. Teams of experts worked to pump the fuel from the ship's tanks to reduce the risk of an oil spill. This task alone was a monumental undertaking, as the ship's hull was badly damaged and the tanks were not easily accessible. The operation required a combination of specialist vessels, remote-controlled robots, and divers to ensure that no fuel remained on board the wreck. Once the fuel had been safely removed, the real work began, the complex and highly technical process of salvaging the ship. The Costa Concordia was lying on its side in shallow water, which presented unique challenges. The ship's massive size, combined with the fact that it had been severely damaged in the collision, made it difficult to move. Additionally, the location was not ideal for large-scale salvage operations, as the ship was close to the shore and in an area that was difficult to access by larger vessels. The first major hurdle was to stabilize the wreck. In order to prevent the ship from sinking further into the seabed or capsizing entirely, a series of underwater steel cables and anchors were attached to the ship. These cables were connected to large tugboats, which would help to keep the Costa Concordia in place while the salvage operation proceeded. To ensure the ship remained upright, the team had to use a combination of ballast and external support structures. This phase of the operation took months, with engineers working tirelessly to secure the wreck to the seabed and stabilize it. After stabilizing the wreck, the next phase involved preparing the ship for the parbuckling operation. Parbuckling is a technique that involves rotating a vessel from its side into an upright position, using a combination of hydraulic systems, cables, and pulleys. This was a particularly challenging process because of the size and weight of the Costa Concordia. The ship weighed over 114,000 tons, making it one of the heaviest objects ever to be rotated using this method. To achieve the parbuckling, an elaborate system of large tanks, known as caissons, was constructed and attached to the sides of the Costa Concordia. These caissons were filled with water and then gradually emptied to create the buoyancy needed to lift the ship. As the caissons filled with water, they exerted pressure on the sides of the ship, slowly bringing the wreck into a more upright position. The process was slow and highly controlled, as even a slight miscalculation could have led to the collapse of the ship or further damage. The actual parbuckling process began in September 2013 and took several days to complete. It was a highly delicate operation that required precise coordination between the salvage teams, tugboats, and engineers. The Costa Concordia was slowly rotated, inch by inch, until it was upright once again. The operation was watched by millions of people around the world as it marked a significant milestone in the effort to recover the wreck. Although it was a moment of triumph for the teams involved, the operation was far from over. The ship was now upright, but there was still a long way to go before it could be safely towed away. Once the Costa Concordia was upright, the next task was to remove the wreck from the shallow waters off Isola del Giglio. The plan was to tow the ship to a port in Genoa, Italy, where it would be dismantled. However, the shallow depth of the water and the presence of underwater rocks and reefs made towing the ship a risky proposition. To facilitate the process, a series of additional tugboats were used to tow the ship slowly through the waters. The wreck was also fitted with a series of pontoons and flotation devices to ensure that it remained afloat during the journey. This was another delicate phase of the operation, as the ship's hull had been severely damaged and the risk of further structural collapse was high. The tow began in July 2014, and the Costa Concordia was slowly hauled away from Isola del Giglio. The journey took several days, and the wreck was closely monitored to ensure that it did not suffer any further damage. Once the ship arrived in Genoa, it was anchored in a secure location where the final stage of the salvage operation began. In Genoa, the Costa Concordia was dismantled, piece by piece. The process was a highly specialized operation, as the ship's steel and other materials were carefully removed and recycled. The dismantling of the ship was a slow and labor-intensive process that took nearly 3 years to complete. Throughout this time, the wreckage was carefully scrutinized to ensure that any remaining fuel, toxic substances, or hazardous materials were safely disposed of. The operation was conducted in accordance with strict environmental regulations, and a significant portion of the materials was recycled, with more than 80% of the ship's materials being repurposed. The entire salvage operation cost an estimated €1.5 billion, making it one of the most expensive maritime salvage operations in history. The project required the collaboration of thousands of workers, engineers, and specialists from around the world. It also relied heavily on cutting-edge technology and innovation, as the teams had to develop new techniques to deal with the unique challenges presented by the Costa Concordia wreck. While the physical recovery of the wreck was a monumental achievement, the emotional and legal aftermath of the disaster continued to linger. The families of the victims were left to grapple with the loss of their loved ones, and the legal proceedings against Captain Francesco Schettino and other crew members continued for years after the incident. In addition to the loss of life, the Costa Concordia disaster had lasting implications for the cruise industry, as it led to a significant overhaul of safety protocols and regulations. In the years following the salvage operation, the Costa Concordia wreck has remained a symbol of the devastating consequences of human error and the complexity of large-scale maritime disasters. It is also a testament to the resilience and determination of the many people involved in the recovery efforts. The salvage operation was not just about recovering a ship, but also about restoring the integrity of a community, protecting the environment, and providing closure for the families of those who lost their lives. The Costa Concordia salvage operation serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of safety, preparation, and swift action in the face of disaster. It also highlights the extraordinary lengths to which humanity can go when confronted with a tragedy, and the incredible resilience of both individuals and communities in the wake of such events. The scientific exploration and investigation of the Costa Concordia wreck were vital in understanding the full impact of the disaster and its aftermath. While the immediate focus was on rescue and recovery, there was also a need to examine the wreckage from both a scientific and environmental perspective. This aspect of the operation was crucial, as it provided not only answers to the cause of the disaster, but also insights into the longer-term ecological and environmental consequences of the event. Once the Costa Concordia had been stabilized and refloated, marine scientists, environmentalists, and archaeologists began to examine the wreck site. The primary focus of these investigations was to assess the impact of the disaster on the surrounding marine environment, particularly on the fragile ecosystem of the Tuscan Archipelago National Park. The Costa Concordia had been lying on its side in shallow water, just a few hundred meters from the shore, and it was feared that the wreck could cause long-term damage to the biodiversity area. The ship was home to various hazardous materials, including fuel and chemicals, and there was concern that these could leak into the sea and contaminate the local marine life. One of the first tasks for the scientific teams was to conduct a thorough environmental assessment of the wreck. This involved using advanced underwater imaging technology, such as sonar and remote-operated vehicles (ROV), to map the wreck and assess its condition. These tools provided valuable data on the state of the ship and allowed scientists to identify any potential environmental hazards. It was critical to ensure that any fuel remaining in the ship's tanks was removed before further contamination could occur. During the initial investigation, scientists discovered that although the Costa Concordia had caused significant damage to the seafloor and the surrounding marine environment, the situation was not as dire as originally feared. The ship's position had been stabilized, and most of the fuel had been removed, reducing the risk of an oil spill. However, the damage to the marine ecosystem remained a concern. The area around the wreck site had been disturbed by the weight of the ship and the debris that had fallen from it, which could have had a lasting effect on the local marine life. Marine life near the wreck was also a focal point of scientific exploration. Researchers studied the effects of the ship's presence on the surrounding oceanic environment, focusing on the disruption to the local ecosystem. The Costa Concordia wreck was essentially an artificial reef, and as the ship remained stationary for months, marine organisms began to colonize it. Scientists observed the growth of algae, barnacle, and other marine life on the surface of the wreck. While this was a natural process, it also raised questions about the potential long-term effects of such a large structure remaining in the water. The ship could act as a habitat for marine species, but at the same time, it could also disrupt the natural balance of the exploration of the wreck also involved archaeologists and historians, who sought to preserve the ship's cultural and historical significance. As the Costa Concordia was an enormous vessel with a rich history, its wreckage became an object of study for those interested in maritime history and archaeology. Scientists used advanced imaging techniques to create detailed maps of the ship's interior, documenting the damage caused by the disaster and the way the ship had been designed. These efforts helped to capture a snapshot of the ship's construction and its state prior to the disaster, providing valuable data for future studies of large ships and maritime engineering. While the primary concern was environmental, the scientific exploration of the wreck also provided important lessons for future maritime safety. Researchers examined the structural integrity of the ship, looking at how the collision with the reef had caused such extensive damage. This information was crucial in understanding the factors that contributed to the ship sinking and in identifying ways to prevent similar accidents from occurring in the future. The Costa Concordia was a state-of-the-art vessel, and its design had been considered a model of modern cruise ship construction. However, the exploration of the wreck revealed weaknesses in its structure, particularly the areas of its watertight compartments and hull integrity. These findings led to recommendations for improving the safety features of future cruise ships. The salvage and scientific exploration of the Costa Concordia also involved a significant amount of technological innovation. The use of ROVs and underwater drones played a critical role in the investigation, allowing researchers to explore the wreck without the need for divers. These devices provided high-resolution images of the wreck and allowed for detailed surveys of the surrounding seabed. They also enabled scientists to examine parts of the wreck that were inaccessible to human divers, such as the lower levels of the ship that were buried beneath the sand. One of the most notable aspects of the scientific exploration was the discovery of various artifacts and items from the ship. These ranged from personal belongings of the passengers to pieces of the ship's equipment and structure. The process of recovering these items was sensitive, as many of them were of sentimental value to the families of the victims. In some cases, family members were able to retrieve personal items from the wreck, offering them a sense of closure and connection to their lost loved ones. The investigation also included an analysis of the ship's data systems, including its navigation and communication equipment. This was essential in understanding the sequence of events that led to the disaster and in determining the role that human error played in the incident. Investigators were able to examine the ship's black box, which recorded key data related to the ship's movement, speed, and communications during the disaster. This data was crucial in piecing together the timeline of events and in establishing the causes of the collision. Throughout the scientific exploration, the primary goal was to ensure that the lessons learned from the disaster were used to improve maritime safety and environmental protection. The Costa Concordia disaster had a profound impact on the cruise industry, and it led to significant changes in regulations and practices. One of the most important outcomes was the introduction of new safety protocols for large passenger ships, including stricter requirements for evacuation procedures, improved navigation systems, and enhanced training for crew members. The scientific exploration of the wreck also provided an opportunity to assess the broader implications of the disaster. The Costa Concordia incident raised important questions about the safety of the cruise industry as a whole, and the responsibility of cruise lines to ensure the well-being of their passengers. It also highlighted the potential environmental risks posed by large ships and the importance of preparedness in the face of such disasters. In the years following the Costa Concordia disaster, the wreck continued to be studied and explored, with new findings emerging as technology advanced. The ship's legacy, while marked by tragedy, also served as a catalyst for change in the maritime industry. The lessons learned from the scientific exploration of the wreck have contributed to making the cruise industry safer and more environmentally responsible. The Costa Concordia disaster remains a reminder of the fragility of human-made structures and the need for constant vigilance and innovation in the pursuit of safety and environmental protection. In the wake of the Costa Concordia disaster, the final recovery phase and the extensive legal, environmental, and public relations aftermath shaped the long-term legacy of the tragedy. While the primary focus had initially been on rescuing passengers and stabilizing the wreck, the final stages of the salvage operation represented an even more complex and drawn-out process. These efforts were marked by technical challenges, environmental concerns, and the need for sensitive management of the wreckage, which had now become a symbol of human error, corporate negligence, and tragic loss. By the time the Costa Concordia had been successfully parbuckled and was upright once more, the immediate environmental threats had been mitigated. The fuel had been removed, and measures had been taken to prevent further pollution from the wreck. However, the final phase of the recovery effort involved dismantling the ship, a monumental task that would span several years. The wreck was towed to the port of Genoa, Italy, where it would be dismantled and recycled. This operation itself was highly complex and required careful planning to minimize any potential environmental impact. The process of dismantling the Costa Concordia was a slow and meticulous one. The wreck was large, weighing over 114,000 tons, and it had been severely damaged by the collision and the subsequent flooding. The ship's structure had to be carefully cut apart, and each piece was inspected to ensure that hazardous materials, such as asbestos and other toxic substances, were properly handled. Workers had to wear protective gear, and strict safety protocols were followed to ensure that no materials from the wreck would contaminate the surrounding environment. One of the most significant challenges during this phase was the removal of the wreck from the coastal waters, especially because the ship had partially submerged, and much of it had been damaged in the disaster. The structure was in danger of breaking apart during the dismantling process, which made it critical to secure every part of the ship and work slowly and carefully. This operation was conducted by a large team of engineers, marine salvage experts, and demolition specialists, who worked in close coordination to ensure the ship's safe disassembly. The ship's remains were transported to various locations for recycling. The materials, such as steel and other metals, were extracted and sent to recycling facilities, with more than 80% of the ship being recycled in the end. This aspect of the recovery was a significant logistical effort, as the wreck had to be cut into manageable pieces, transported, and carefully sorted. The dismantling process was also made more difficult by the complexity of the ship's systems, which had to be thoroughly examined to ensure that no harmful substances remained. Throughout the process, the Costa Concordia wreck became a symbol of both the vulnerability of human-made structures and the resilience of those working to recover it. The ship, which had once represented luxury, adventure, and escape for passengers, now stood as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the complex world of maritime travel. The final recovery and dismantling of the ship were necessary to ensure that the wreckage would not pose a long-term risk to the environment, but it also marked the end of a chapter that had left a lasting impact on the world. While the physical recovery of the Costa Concordia wreck was a significant achievement, the emotional and legal aftermath of the disaster continued to unfold. The families of the victims had to come to terms with the fact that the incident had taken place due to a series of mistakes and poor decisions, most notably those of Captain Francesco Schettino. Schettino's actions, both before and during the disaster, led to widespread outrage and led to his eventual conviction. His failure to adhere to established safety protocols, as well as his abandonment of the ship during the evacuation, were key factors that contributed to the loss of life. Schettino was not the only one to face legal consequences. Costa Concordia, the company behind the Costa Concordia, was also held accountable for its role in the disaster. Legal proceedings against the company focused on the adequacy of its safety practices, the training of its crew members, and its response to the emergency. In the wake of the disaster, Costa Concordia faced lawsuits from passengers and the families of victims. The company was fined, and significant changes were made to ensure that similar accidents would not happen again. These legal actions served as a reminder of the responsibility of companies to maintain high standards of safety and accountability. The Costa Concordia tragedy also prompted a broader examination of the cruise industry's practices. Many questioned whether the industry had become too complacent in its focus on luxury and entertainment at the expense of safety. The incident led to calls for stricter regulations, better training for crew members, and more comprehensive emergency procedures. New maritime safety regulations were introduced in the aftermath of the disaster, such as more stringent requirements for lifeboats and evacuation drills, as well as better navigational equipment to prevent such accidents from happening again. The public perception of the cruise industry was significantly damaged by the Costa Concordia disaster. Prior to the incident, cruise ships were often seen as safe and luxurious ways to travel. However, after the disaster, many passengers and potential customers began to question the safety standards of the cruise industry. The sinking of the Costa Concordia shattered the perception of cruises as entirely safe and carefree experiences. The media coverage of the disaster, particularly the scenes of passengers being rescued and the ship sinking, left a lasting impression on the public. The cruise industry, in turn, worked hard to rebuild its reputation. Cruise lines responded by implementing new safety measures and increasing transparency about their safety protocols. These measures were designed to reassure the public that the cruise industry had learned from the mistakes of the Costa Concordia disaster and was committed to ensuring passenger safety. However, it would take years for the industry to fully recover from the damage to its reputation. Despite these efforts, the disaster had a lasting impact on how the public viewed cruises. The families of the victims were not only faced with grief, but also with the challenge of finding closure. While some families found solace in the legal proceedings and the eventual conviction of Captain Schettino, many still struggled with the unanswered questions surrounding the disaster. Despite the extensive investigations, much about the final moments of the Costa Concordia remained shrouded in uncertainty. The families continued to advocate for transparency, and their efforts ensured that the disaster would not be forgotten. Their voices played an important role in shaping the legacy of the Costa Concordia tragedy. As the final remnants of the Costa Concordia were dismantled and recycled, the wreck itself was no longer a physical presence, but its legacy remained. The lessons learned from the disaster continue to shape maritime safety regulations, and the tragic loss of life serves as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance, accountability, and the preservation of life. The Costa Concordia remains a key moment in maritime history, a tragedy that changed the way we think about safety at sea, the responsibilities of cruise lines, and the need for greater oversight in the cruise industry.